some folks are just getting it.
Hmm.
$6.50, $6.59, guys.
I hear the clock tower outside.
Okay, I'm going to, let's see. Keith, can you start your video? And I'm going to stop the screen share and begin.
Am I on?
Yes, hold on, let me stop the screen share. And hide with Deb. And Deb, would you turn off your cameras until Keith is done? It's all yours.
Well, great day, everyone. Glad to see you. Happy to see you all. Welcome to all of you tonight, and very happy you are joining us for another in our series of Grassroots North Shore Town Halls. May I add special greetings for those who are joining us for the first time as well. Hi to you. We certainly hope you can be on hand for our future events, and especially hoping to see you in person very soon. If you wish to find out more about us and join our email list, go to grassrootsnorthshore.com. I want to take this time to let you know about our upcoming event, Green is Good, on Sunday, June 13th, when we hear from experts about how we can make our state more sustainable. Look for information about that event on our site as well. Just to let you know, these and many other great events are made possible by our events committee headed up by Shirley Horowitz. Before we talk about cleaning up our state's map mess, thanks go out to our co-sponsors, the League of Women Voters, Milwaukee County, and to the Fair Maps Commission. We would also like to thank Debbie Patel, North Shore team leader, for moderating tonight's town hall. So Deb, please take it away.
Thank you, Keith. So Eileen, am I on the screen now? All right.
I see you on the screen.
Okay, great. Thank you, Keith, and thanks to the Grassroots North Shore team for hosting this town hall. I'm happy to be here representing North Shore Fair Maps. We are a strictly nonpartisan group of citizens who want to end gerrymandering. We began as Grassroots North Shore Issues team, and now we have our own website, we hold monthly meetings, have working groups, and more. No matter your personal politics, and whether you know it or not, you are affected by gerrymandering. Partisan gerrymandering strikes at the very core of the American political experience. To set the stage for the evening, I want us to start with a little talk about civics. If you were applying for the United States citizenship, you would be taught these things about America. First, we live in a republic. Think of the times you've said, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. Well, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines a republic as a government in which supreme power resides in a body of citizens entitled to vote. It is exercised by elected representatives responsible to those citizens. That's what's called representative democracy. We vote and we choose who will represent us. Do you recognize these phrases? We the people, consent of the governed. Both the United States and the Wisconsin constitutions begin with we the people. And the very first section of the very first article of Wisconsin's constitution says that government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. We give our consent when we gather together for free and fair elections. But what happens when people vote, but their votes don't count? When votes get counted, but they don't count? Welcome to partisan gerrymandering, where the balance of power between we the people and those who represent us is thrown off kilter. It's about power. Power is seductive. Power does not want to let go. It clings and it claws and it digs in, desperate to hold on. Partisan gerrymandering is an effort to stay in power no matter whether it's right or wrong, and no matter the cost. And no matter who does it, it's got to be stopped. We must end gerrymandering. As you listen this evening, ask yourself whether the citizens of Wisconsin have actually consented to be governed. How can consent be given when votes don't count? How can we call this representative democracy? And take it from me, this is no way to run a republic. I'm honored to be moderating this discussion with a panel of experts this evening. They are Deb Andraca, Wisconsin Assemblywoman from the 23rd District, Mel Barnes, Staff Counsel at Law Forward, and Carlene Bechen, the statewide organizer for the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition. The four of us have planned a robust discussion. It's a conversation among friends working in the field. It has been such a joy to get to know these fierce democracy advocates. Between now and 8:30, we plan to accomplish a couple of things. First, we're going to provide an overview of Wisconsin's map mess, explain gerrymandering, show you the mess caused by partisan gerrymandering. And then second, we're going to show you how the map mess is being mopped up and how you can take action to help. Imagine 3 buckets filled with the ingredients needed to mop up the mess. The first bucket is government, the legislature and the governor, and also the People's Maps Commission. The second bucket is filled with tools to be used in courts of law. That's the lawyer bucket. The third bucket, where you and I reside, is the we the people bucket, the court of public opinion, where we can take action. We hope to answer questions that may arise throughout our conversation. We will not be using the chat box, but we ask that you put questions you have in the question and answer box in the bottom of your screen. We will get to as many of those as we can, probably at the end of our time together. Final housekeeping items. First, within 24 hours, Grassroots North Shore will send everyone who registered for this event a short questionnaire asking you how you would like to take action. Fill it out when you get it. Don't put it off, just do it. We need your help. Second, sometime this week, I will forward an outline of the material we are covering tonight, and I will add your name and email to my email list for North Shore Fair Maps, so you will hear from me on a regular basis from my personal Gmail account. You can stop those emails anytime you want just by telling me. Okay, with that short civics lesson and an introduction, let's begin. As I mentioned earlier, I'm joined tonight by Deb Andraca, Mel Barnes, and Carlene Bechen. Welcome. First, Mel, I'm going to turn to you. Thank you so much for being on tonight's panel. As I mentioned, one of the basic principles of our government is that the voices of the people are to be heard. They're heard through their representatives. To do that, every decade, we go through a process called redistricting. You are the staff counsel at Law Forward. Law Forward is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, impact litigation firm committed to protecting and advancing democracy. You just issued a Redistricting 101 white paper. What exactly is redistricting, and what is partisan gerrymandering?
Well, first, thanks so much for having me, Deb, and everyone here. And I look forward to sharing a copy of Redistricting 101 with all of you. But we're here, so let's discuss what exactly that means and what partisan gerrymandering is. So let's start with redistricting, which is really just the process of drawing lines for our districts, each of which are represented in the state legislature by one elected official, a state senator or a state representative. Redistricting is adjusting those lines, which has to happen every decade because it's required by the Wisconsin state constitution and also the US Supreme Court. And it's also how we make representatives work for us. The legislature itself is tasked with this reapportionment, which is how the Constitution refers to it. It doesn't use the word draw. But what the Constitution of Wisconsin makes clear is the legislature is in charge of adjusting these districts, but it must do so with the approval of the governor. There's a state Supreme Court case from the 1960s that makes it crystal clear that the governor has to sign off on the new maps, just like any other law. So let's talk about what else the Constitution requires when it comes time for the legislature to adjust these maps. The districts must be as compact as practicable. meaning they shouldn't zigzag all crazy over the state, although sometimes we see that and sometimes we see those districts challenged in court. The district should be contiguous, made up of area that touches each other, and they should be bounded by county, precinct, town, or ward lines. So those are divisions of local government in Wisconsin. And while we sometimes see that rule have to bend to accommodate population, that is required by the state constitution. You might notice some things that are missing from that list. For example, communities of interest, which are not mentioned by the state constitution in Wisconsin, although it is a traditional redistricting criteria to protect and preserve those communities of interest. And it's something other state constitutions require, and certainly something courts have considered in the past. Now, the real key to redistricting is about balancing population. And the US Supreme Court has made it clear that state legislative districts must be roughly equal in population. And that is one of the many reasons that we redistrict every 10 years. So this is because of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, which gives everyone the right to be represented equally by government. And there's a principle in redistricting that comes from a line of cases that started with Baker v. Carr, but really there are several. And you might have heard it before. It's called one person, one vote. And this is really what equal protection boils down to in the redistricting context. It means that wherever you live in the state, your vote should count for the same amount as a vote of someone else in the other state. So when you're sending representatives to the state legislature, you should have equal power to do that as someone else located somewhere else in the state. Now, the state legislature does sometimes struggle to redistrict and rebalance these populations when it comes time to do so after each federal census. And that's why we've seen redistricting go to court kind of a lot. So in most decades since the 1970s, when the Supreme Court really articulated this one person, one vote principle, whenever there's been divided partisan control of government, Republicans controlling one chamber or the entire legislature or the governor's office and Democrats controlling the others, the courts have ended up having to redistrict and draw the maps themselves. So 2010 was actually a kind of an outlier in Wisconsin in that we had united control of government in one political party. And that is why the legislature and governor were able to agree on new maps. Those maps still ended up in court, as we'll talk about later, because they didn't comply with some of the other legal requirements other than just drawing new maps. But we'll get to that. The reason that this ended up in court is really because of the other thing that you asked about, Deb, which is partisan gerrymandering. And those maps that were drawn in 2010 were found by the Wisconsin District Court to be a partisan gerrymander, which means that the lines were drawn not just to represent people, not just to balance population, but for the specific reason of maintaining party control by one political party. And that control was designed to last for the entire redistricting cycle of 10 years. There's incredible power in drawing the lines when it comes to redistricting, and it's why there are so frequently political fights over it that have to be settled by the court. So we'll talk a little bit more about partisan gerrymandering as the night goes on here and how that's ended up in court, but really the main core of it is drawing lines to preserve political power, not your political power as the people, as the voters, but the political power of one political party.
Thanks, Mel. That was informative. Thanks for explaining redistricting, which should be done every decade, and partisan gerrymandering, which we don't want to be done. And a reminder to the participants, you're going to get an event outline. It will have information on how to get your copy of Redistricting 101. So one of the best ways to really understand gerrymandering is to see it in action. The four of us have seen a 2-minute video called Gerrymandering by the Numbers. I call it the pennies video. Some people call it the guy in suspenders video. It's worth the time to share it now. And I want to add this note, sharing videos on Zoom, even when you set everything up right, can be wonky. Sometimes the sound doesn't go through for all the participants. We apologize in advance if that happens to you. The good news about this video is that it's actually not bad as a silent movie. So give me a minute to set it up. and we will watch. Here we go.
Partisan redistricting, or gerrymandering, is about fractions, percentages. These coins represent voters in an evenly divided state, 50 dimes, 50 pennies. These 100 coins elect 10 representatives. That means each voting district must contain 10 coins. Now, real people don't live in neat rows, so let's mix them up. Okay, this is our hypothetical evenly divided state. Let's see what happens if the dimes draw the maps. 10 coins in each district. For the dimes, first thing we do is pack the pennies. Give them 2 safe districts, but pack them solid. The remaining 8 districts are won by the dimes, by smaller but still comfortable margins. The dimes win 8 districts and the pennies win 2. The dimes overwhelmingly control the legislature. Of course, if the pennies drew the district lines, the opposite would be true. Let's rig it for the pennies. For the pennies, we follow the same pack and crack strategy. Pack the dimes into 2 safe districts and crack the remaining 8 districts to win by the same margin, 8-2. Well, now that we've destroyed democracy, let's consider what this map would look like if the districts were drawn for compactness and keeping communities of interest together. You get evenly divided districts in an evenly divided state. Some go heavily dime, some go penny, but that's to be expected. People live where they live, and that is what democracy is about. It's not about party bosses rigging election districts so they can fix the election results.
All right. So now if you will give me a minute to get us back to where we were before. Oops. There we go. Stop screen share. Just a couple more things I need to do. And we are back in business. So that's a good look at the pennies video. It shows how partisan gerrymandering works. When you're going to get a link to that in the outline, and I'm going to ask you to take action. Share that video with friends on social media or in an email and tell the world that you want to end gerrymandering. Carlene, I'm going to turn to you next. Thank you for bringing your expertise and energy to this event and to the field. You've been in the trenches fighting for fair maps for almost a decade. The mission of the Fair Maps Coalition is to advocate and to enact in law and practice an independent and nonpartisan redistricting method in Wisconsin, and to educate and engage the public in the process of adopting and implementing nonpartisan maps. In Wisconsin, the spotlight has been on the state assembly maps. As the lead organizer for the coalition, you have seen and heard about every Wisconsin assembly map in this state. So we thought that you could walk us through a few slides, examples of partisan gerrymandering right here in Wisconsin, part of our map mess, and share your knowledge from the field, what you have learned about our mess. So I'm going to go back, Carlene, to share slides for you. Give me a minute.
First, before I start to say anything, I just want to thank you, Debbie, for your leadership in your area and all the things that you have been doing, because it does make an enormous difference. I'm a grassroots organizer, and Debbie is a grassroots team leader, and so that's what I'm charged with doing, is helping folks on the ground become engaged with this issue. So Debbie asked me to talk just a little bit about some examples of districts that prior to the 2011 redistricting were pretty competitive, and post 2011 are either packed or cracked. So this first slide that is shown here on the left are the districts in the Racine and Kenosha areas for the 21st and 22nd Senate districts. We often talk about the Assembly, but the Senate is also gerrymandered. So the Senate districts there on the left were pretty purple. They turned over, the races were very tight. Democrats actually won more often than Republicans, but the races were razor thin. And the legislators who won were very accountable, had to be accountable in order to be able to win in consecutive elections, because otherwise they would have been voted out. And so the districts then on the right for Racine and Kenosha counties show solidly red, solidly blue districts. The District 22 in the Senate there is very urban, very blue, and very solidly red and unaccountable. Honestly, that's the thing that happens. It doesn't matter which side you're on, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. If you live in a packed district, you become unaccountable. No one can really hold you to something, because your likelihood of being unelected is pretty slim. And Deb will be able to talk about what it's like to be in a very competitive district when she chats with you. So the next slide shows another district that prior to the 2011 redistricting, these two districts, 55 and 57, were very competitive. So 57 is mostly the city of Appleton, and 55 was the Menasha area. They had been together in that, well, they're together for so many reasons. They are a prime example of a community of interest. The paper industry, lots of other things, their proximity to Lake Winnebago, other things really made them a district that had shared interests. And historically, they had been together and very competitive. The parties changed leadership in that district in 55, excuse me, over the years, many, many times. 57 is the city of Appleton, not all of the city of Appleton, because it does go down into Winnebago County and into Calumet County. The district on the right is really hard to tell where things change between 55 and 57. Suffice it to say that 57 goes down into what used to be 55. So it's part of the city of Appleton and takes in the city of Menasha, which used to be with Nina, where it has shared interests. Now, neither of those districts are competitive. 55 is strongly Republican, 57 is strongly Democratic. Both districts used to be competitive, now neither is competitive. And that's a loss for everyone. And then if you go to the next slide, this is the city of Marshfield. Marshfield on the left, if you look, actually, you should start by looking at the map on the right, where you see the two highways that go out of the city of Marshfield up into the county above them, into Marathon County. And if you look from that to the map on the left, you can see the city of Marshfield used to all be in the same district. Now it's not in the same district. The city itself is cut apart. So there's a county line that divides it north-south. So they already had that going, that kind of obstacle to some of their representation. But now they also are in two different assembly districts and also two different Senate districts. And it has made it very, very difficult for the citizens and the voters in the city of Marshfield to impact anything that happens to them in the state legislature, and they have a negligible, as it says there, a negligible impact on what happens in the state legislature in their votes. And I have to give a shout out to Bill Whitford, who has talked at length about all of these and helped me with figuring out some really good examples for you of places where things have been packed and cracked.
So what I hear from you, Carlene, because we often hear, oh, it's just a problem because people, you know, Democrats live in cities, and so what, something happens, you know, in a big city, it has to be divided. But what happened is there's packing and cracking all over the state, and that's why we wanted you to show some of these slides. And I know I used to practice law with the Vanta Corporation, and it was always called Nina Menasha. So it's sad to see those two communities split this way.
Absolutely, you're so right. And you know, you have to wonder what is defensible about this. In my view, there's nothing that's defensible about splitting a city as small as the city of Marshfield into 2 different assembly districts or 2 different Senate districts. It just makes no sense. It
makes no sense. It makes sense if you want a partisan gerrymander. So we're going to go to another slide. And this is the Deb Andraca slide. And I'm going to just keep my screen share up, and I'll introduce you a little bit after we get off of screen share. But you have a couple of slides that are near and dear to me. Thank you for being here. In 2020, you were elected to represent the 23rd Assembly District. You live in the 23rd, and I live in the 24th, next door. And what can you tell us about your slides and the North Shore gerrymander?
Well, let's talk close to home, because not only is gerrymandering happening all over the state, but it's really happening right here in our backyards. And I know around 2010, 2011, I was not paying attention to any of this. Redistricting was a thing that happened. They just realign and you just kind of go on your way. And before 2011, the district where most of us live right now, it just made sense. We have a North Shore Fire Department. We have a North Shore Library. They're not always the same communities, but they're the places where we live and where we work and where our kids go to school, and they share a same general area. I live in Whitefish Bay. I buy a lot of my groceries at the Whitefish Bay Sendix in Whitefish Bay. Sometimes I'll go to the Metro Market in Shorewood. When I want to burn money, I'll go down to the east side and I'll go to Whole Foods. I love going up to the Mequon Sendix because that one is great and it has just about everything. So communities and districts should really reflect their communities. They're like the people. They're not perfect, but they just kind of make sense. Next slide, please. So this is my current district. So this is what happened after they redrew the maps in 2011. The left side of the graphic is the official part that you will get when you go to the Legislative Technology Bureau. I put the leg lamp and Ralphie on there because once you see it, you can't unsee it. We call it the leg lamp district. It stretches about 30 miles along the lake. And it might be a convenient district. It's definitely not a compact district. Let's say you lived along the lake in Mequon, halfway in between the two, maybe it's a convenient district. But by any stretch of the imagination, you could not say that it's compact, nor could you really say that it represents a community like we just talked about. Next slide, please. So the 23rd district and the 24th district both have pieces of what used to be the old district before the gerrymander. And if you take a look at it closely, it's just a crazy quilt. Representative Dan Knodel represents the 24th district. There are 4 different counties in the 24th district. I have 2 counties. Half of my district is Milwaukee County and half of my district is Ozaukee County. And it is not uncommon to have multiple counties, say, in your district. I know that there are several in the northern parts of the state, but that's because they have no, they barely have any people. You have to put counties together in order to get a certain number. Here in Milwaukee, there's absolutely no reason why you should have to have 4 different counties in your district. unless you have something else in mind. Next slide, please. So here is a slide that I put together because I really want people who live in the Milwaukee area to understand what's happening. The yellow line represents the Milwaukee County line. And we talked about cracking and packing. And you'll see that my district, the 23rd, the Milwaukee County part, and then goes up into Ozaukee County. When we hear cracking, if you're trying to dilute the political power of, say, Milwaukee County, you'll want to have as many districts reach in and grab little pieces of it. You can see my district, the 23rd, the 24th, the 22nd even has a tiny bit of Milwaukee, the 14th, the 13th, all of them take a little bit out of Milwaukee County and put it onto a more conservative area. And that's what we call, that is the textbook definition of cracking. You'll see the other districts inside Milwaukee County, they're kind of crazy shaped too. The only way that you can get to a durable gerrymander is to just make these crazy districts. Are they contiguous? Do they all stick together? Yes. But are they organized around the interests and the priorities of the people who live in them? Absolutely not. Next slide, please.
Oh, my favorite slide.
So I generally try to stick to what's going on in the state legislature, but this is worth pointing out because I came across it very recently, even though it's been around for a decade. So during my campaign, I had to organize brochures, and these brochures had candidates on them, and we had 2 different congressional districts, which is not uncommon. So part of my district had the 4th congressional district, and part of it had the 6th congressional district. And we were sending brochures to River Hills, which I know is in Milwaukee County, but we had to send them the Ozaukee County brochures. And I thought, well, why would we have to do that? Well, as you can see, there is a River Hills sized hole in the 4th congressional district. Why would that be? Well, one reason might be if you are a, say, Republican state senator who maybe is thinking about running for Congress someday, and you look at your congressional district and you think, it goes south, and, there are a lot of people who would be really hard for me to represent. I say hard, not impossible, because you can represent your district if you work hard, if you listen to your constituents, if you have town hall meetings, if you work to represent the people who you are elected to serve. But it's an awful lot easier for me as a politician to draw a line around my house rather than, let's say, move into a district. Now, I would argue that the good people of River Hills probably have a lot more in common with the people in Fox Point or, say, Glendale than they do in Fond du Lac, which, if you look at the size of that district, that is what it represents. So this is a really close to home example of gerrymandering that is done specifically for politicians. And this is why people like me should not be allowed to draw districts. Now, if I tried to put a Whitefish Bay sized hole in a district and do something like that, when we have something like the People's Maps Commission, I know that I would probably be getting some side eye from Chairman Ford and everybody else, because that process is open, it's transparent. Everyone can see why we are doing the districts the way they're doing. Was this carved out for political purposes? We will never know, because after they drew these maps, they destroyed all the notes. You had to sign a non-disclosure agreement even to look at this district. They even destroyed the hard drives that these were kept on. This is the opposite of an open and transparent process, which is what we're trying to get passed in Wisconsin right now. So I know most of us on this call probably live in this area. This wasn't something I was aware of until I was literally running for the office, but it's something that we need to know and visualize as we're talking about gerrymandering, because it affects us all in very insidious ways.
Thanks, Deb. I'm going to stop sharing, and that map is what brought me to gerrymandering. Because I live in River Hills, and the notion that 1,500 residents, not all whom are voters, like 1,300 voters in Milwaukee County, were tacked on to as a little tooth or a tail to the 6th congressional district just amazes me still. So Deb, now that we're not screen sharing and folks can see you, I will say a bit more in the way of an introduction. You're a school teacher who got concerned enough about things that in 2020, you decided to run for office. You made partisan gerrymandering a campaign issue, and you won. You're a Democrat, and it was a very big deal. But gerrymandering has been around for more than 2 centuries. So what made Act 43, the 2011 gerrymander, what made that different? What can you tell us about what happened in 2011 that was different? You've told us a few things, but was Act 43 an aberration?
It was different in so many ways. And since I've been elected, I have spoken with so many different members of the legislature, and there isn't really a understanding of exactly what happened that year. First of all, the most important thing was that there wasn't any divided government. Right now, we have a Republican legislature, but we have a Democratic governor. So could we pass maps like they did at that time? It would be much harder because Governor Evers would probably be able to veto a map that was set forth by the legislature. So you do have that check on it now. Didn't have that in 2011. The party in power could simply draw a map in secret, bring it to the floor, ram it through in a week and pass it, and it becomes law. So that's how that was a little bit different. A couple of other important things all feed into what happened then too. In 2010, the Citizens United case was passed. This allowed super PACs and other tax-exempt political groups to raise and spend unlimited amounts of dark money. This is money that you don't know where it's coming from. This is money that can be funneled all over the place, and it really has a big impact. If you just look at how much it cost for my race just this past November versus 10, 15 years ago, it has tripled in size. This is because so much more money is being spent on these small state level races than ever before. And I would argue to the detriment of democracy itself. It was in secret. Like I said, the People's Maps Commission, they have had all of hours and hours of Zoom testimony, people talking about their communities, what they want in their district. In 2011, it was all done in secret. Non-disclosure agreements. We still don't know the notes. It was all done away from public scrutiny. They also used about $400,000 in taxpayer-funded private lawyers to draw the maps, even though here in Wisconsin, we have the nonpartisan, the LTSB, we have the Legislative Research Bureau, we have all of these service agencies, some of which, these bureaus were some of the first in the country of its kind, and they have decades of experience serving the legislature in a nonpartisan, fact-based way. Didn't use them. They decided to pay almost $500,000 for attorneys to do it on their own in secret. But probably the biggest difference was computer technology. Until about 10 years ago, maps were drawn literally on paper, and you had to move things around just like you would for a regular map. But with the advent of software, like things like Maptitude and other software programs, you can run algorithm after algorithm using block by block data to come up with all these different scenarios. We just saw the gentleman rearrange the pennies and the dimes. That is a pre-2011 gerrymander. Imagine pennies and dimes times 1,000 amplified with software running map after map after map until you can get the one that you want. And it resulted in an incredibly durable gerrymander. There are in the assembly, only 3 seats have been lost from the Republican majority. Robin Binding in 2018, and myself and Sarah Rodriguez in 2020. And this, despite the fact that there are more Democratic votes cast statewide than Republican votes. So right now there is a huge difference, but it doesn't reflect the popular vote. So you would expect in a purple state like Wisconsin, for it to go back and forth between one party and another, not a gerrymander that can last for a decade without moving, despite the fact that we've seen voter trends the opposite way.
Thanks for that. And one thing that it makes me think of, I mentioned when I started introducing the question that gerrymandering has been around for 200 years, more than 200 years. And for those of you who don't know, we're all probably pronouncing it incorrectly because The name gerrymandering came from a governor of Massachusetts who his name was Gary. So we should be Gary, we're talking about gerrymandering, but he did it, I assume, with pen and paper. And it was so outrageous, they thought, that the press at the time said that one of the districts looked like a salamander. So they called it gerrymander. And as Deb pointed out, what gets gerrymandered today is very unlike what got gerrymandered in 1812. It's very different than it used to be. So I have a follow-up for you, Deb, and we talked about this. You've mentioned this to me before. What's it like to serve in a legislature that has suffered from partisan gerrymandering for a decade? I mean, how does it affect our government's ability to govern, and how does it affect we the people, life in Wisconsin?
Yeah, I liken it to when you get all of your news on social media just from people who agree with you. It's not a robust exchange of ideas. Just as competition is good for business, competition is also good for legislators. And always talking to people who agree with you is not a recipe for innovation, ideas, or collaboration. Just in the short term, it's hard to recruit candidates to run in a lot of these districts. I don't know what that says about me, but if you know that this district is almost impossible to win, then you don't get good candidates coming up to run. And again, it comes down to competition. You need good candidates to run who have the public interest in mind. If the contest is over because of the primary, then people stop paying attention. And we've seen a lot of that lately. There's not a lot of motivation to work across the aisle or collaborate, because when you're so polarized, what your caucus thinks actually becomes just as important, if not more important, than what your voters think, because someone can run against you from your own party. So you stop listening to your voters and you start listening to what the party bosses are saying. And I see it every day. And people who live in these solid red or solid blue districts. I mean, I'm not talking about one party or another, just the calcification that happens when you know the outcome. Why innovate? Why do something different if you know that over and over again, you're probably going to get the same results? If I have a great idea for a bill, then basically I have to find a Republican who might think it's a good idea, and then they will take it as their own and run with it. It doesn't matter if it's important to my constituents. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that which party it is coming from. We see that in gun reform. We see that in Medicaid expansion. Today's headline was, state ignores $1.6 billion because they don't want to expand Medicaid. Local control, mask requirements, medical marijuana, drunk driving laws. Any of these ideas have more than 50% support. The majority of Wisconsinites support them, but because they're not supported by the party that happens to be in power right now, we can't even get a hearing. Most of the hearings right now in the legislature are invited guests only. So the chairman decides when the hearing is, what bills will come up, and who will speak on them. That is not what we learned in civics class. It's about bringing people in. So when you're on the committee, you can hear different ideas from different perspectives and hopefully make up your mind. If everybody already has made up their mind before they go in the room, something is wrong. I have a bill right now. This is a good example. It's a bill that would keep unemployment taxes at the lowest rate for Wisconsin employees. This is a bill that was initially offered by Republicans, but they wanted to use federal funds to do it, the federal funds that are coming, the ARPA funds, and they wanted to make sure that the unemployment insurance trust fund was at a certain level, and they wanted to keep taxes low for business. And I said in committee, that is a good idea, but the Treasury says we can't do that. So last week I offered a bill, does the exact same thing. Keep unemployment insurance taxes at Schedule D, the lowest level for the next 2 years, so that employers can plan that those taxes will stay low. Not a single Republican signed on or will support it. Does the exact same thing, but because it's coming from me, they will not support it, and I don't think it's even going to get a hearing. it's not about the ideas, it's about the party. And that is the toxic, just the corrosive nature of gerrymandering and what it means in the legislature every day.
So I think of it as we're all stuck in a rut, basically. And I feel as sorry for the Republicans in the legislature, almost as I do for the Democrats, because they're stuck in that same rut. They are beholden to the people that control the caucus or the donor base that with the dark money. So they don't have, the Republican legislators have a little more say, only as you said, the party bosses. And in terms of the voters, the Republican voters, this is the same problem. We're all just really stuck in a rut. So anyway, the point, Deb, that you're making is an important one, is putting aside the fact that it's gerrymandering is unfair and it's undemocratic, and I say it's un-American. It harms us in really very practical ways, and that's important to know. So thanks for sharing that. So Mel, I'm gonna swing back to you. And Law Forward is a young nonprofit, but Wisconsin's 2011 legislative maps were basically in court for most of the decade. Carlene, in fact, was a plaintiff in one of the earliest cases, which is called the Baldus case. And she mentioned that if Alvin Baldus had not been a plaintiff, today we would call that case the Bechen case. So I'm sorry, Carlene, that somebody beat you, somebody in the alphabet beat you to it. But the case would have been known as that. And I became a plaintiff in what's called the second round of Wisconsin's most famous gerrymandering case, Whitford versus Gill. And Mel, it still bothers me that the court battle over our maps ended the way it did. And it really bothers me when I hear some of our legislators say that the court said our legislative maps are fine. That is just not true. So I want the audience to know that that is just not true. They didn't say that. So Mel, to make me happy, can you give us a brief summary of what the courts have and have not said about gerrymandering? I think folks need to know what the Whitford case discovered about Wisconsin's map. We've heard some of it, and what they said about what they thought about those maps.
Well, Deb is of course right. The courts found major issues with Wisconsin's maps, and this litigation has been going on basically since right before those maps were adopted into law. So those of you who are familiar with litigation might know that everything moves really slowly when it comes to the courts. Redistricting cases actually move faster than most, but we have been litigating the 2010 maps basically since they have been in existence until very recently. And now it's finally time to litigate a new round of maps. But let's talk about what the court saw when they looked at those maps, which, as I said before, were some of the only maps we've seen in recent history to be passed by the legislature and the governor and not drawn by courts themselves in one way or another. So in the Baldus case, the court actually ordered 2 of the assembly districts redrawn. They found that they violated the Voting Rights Act and ordered 2 of the assembly districts to be adjusted. So the court obviously found issues there. In the Baldus case, the court also found a lot of issues with the way that the legislature had approached this map drawing process and the secretive nature. There were some very scathing commentaries from the judges about how the legislature approached that and the way that they continued to try to keep everything they had done secret even after litigation had started. But let's talk about Whitford. This is really the classic partisan gerrymandering case out of Wisconsin. And what the Whitford case attempted to do is give the US Supreme Court a way to look at partisan gerrymandering and decide what goes too far. The US Supreme Court had been looking at partisan gerrymandering or other redistricting cases for quite a while and kind of saying, you know, it doesn't smell right to us, but we don't have an exact right test for what a court should say is allowable political priorities by the legislature and what isn't. So one of the really cool things about the Whitford case is the test that the plaintiffs developed and advocated for, which, much as maps are now drawn with these very math-driven algorithms and computers, this basically took the same approach and said, we have statistical analyses now that can tell us kind of what goes too far, what is the crazy end of the spectrum versus kind of politics as usual. And so this is called the efficiency gap in the case. But what the court found when it looked at the Wisconsin's 2010 maps is an extreme partisan gerrymander that was out of line with really maps drawn in the rest of the country and drawn throughout the rest of history. And the court recognized, you know, when you have politicians drawing these maps, they're going to do things that are good for them. And that's kind of a baseline level of shenanigans that we're just going to have when the legislature is doing redistricting. And then the court went out of its way to be like, and this is so far beyond that. So the court really wrote a strong opinion talking about how this was an extreme partisan gerrymander and talked about the intention of what the legislature was doing when it adopted these maps was to burden the representational rights of Democratic voters. And it specifically found that the intention was to do that throughout the 10-year period that these maps would be in effect. So they looked at the evidence and they said the legislature was trying not only to rig this next election, but every other election in the 10-year period. So that's a huge statement for the court to be that bold. The courts rarely go that far and honestly write things that clear. And another thing that they noted, which I think we still hear sometimes from folks, we'll hear people say like, well, Democrats live in cities, Republicans live everywhere else, so this is a natural phenomenon. The court in the Whitford District Court was very clear that while that might explain some of what happens in Wisconsin, there might be some natural packing of Democratic voters in cities. That did not explain what was happening with the 2010 Wisconsin maps. And in fact, it explained a really small part of it. They said this might have a moderate effect, and other maps that have been drawn by courts in Wisconsin may have a natural Republican lean statewide just because of how the state is populated and who lives here. The court was very clear that that was not what was happening with the 2010 maps and that this was very distinct. So what happened? If the court found that, why do we still have these maps? Why are we living under them? What happened is this decision was appealed to the US Supreme Court. And in redistricting cases, you go basically from this 3-judge panel at the district court level straight to the Supreme Court. There's not an intermediary step. And what the US Supreme Court said was, you know what? We're not even gonna look at these questions because we don't think you have brought us this case through the right people. We don't think that you have standing, which is basically a legal technicality, but it's meant to ensure that cases are fully developed. And what the Supreme Court said was, we are not even going to attempt to answer the questions of if this is a partisan gerrymander, if it goes too far, anything like that, because we think that you do not have the right plaintiffs in front of us. So basically the case got sent back down. And as the legal team and the plaintiffs were recruiting more folks to represent every single district in Wisconsin, because that's basically what the US Supreme Court said that they were going to require, needed a voter from every single district to put their name on this lawsuit. While that was happening, another case was decided by the US Supreme Court, and that was called Rucho v. Common Cause. This was also a challenge to partisan gerrymandering. And what the US Supreme Court said in that case is federal courts are getting out of the business of looking at partisan gerrymanders. They said, this is not something that we think that courts should be deciding. We think it's inherently a political issue, and courts like to state that they're staying out of politics all the time. So what that case basically did is it stopped every single other partisan gerrymandering case around the country. All those cases stopped them in their tracks. And it said, you know what, please don't come here and complain to us at the US Supreme Court. Find another way to resolve this. And the opinion did recognize that partisan gerrymandering is incredibly undemocratic, that it's a huge problem in the country. It just said that the federal courts did not want to be the ones fixing this. And, you can disagree about whether or not that's right and whether or not there are effective other avenues for addressing this issue, but that's where we've landed. And the only reason that the Whitford case never got a chance to be affirmed at the US Supreme Court is because this other case was decided in the meantime, which basically meant an end to this case. It does not mean and I want to be really clear because I think Deb will appreciate this too. It does not mean that the US Supreme Court disagreed with what the district court found in Whitford. It literally did not address those issues at all. And what happens in legal cases is district courts are generally tasked with the fact finding. The US Supreme Court or other appellate courts really look to see if that that lower court applied the law correctly. They don't go rooting around into all the factual findings and reverse those. If there's something that's clearly in error, the court will find that. But everything that the district court said about the districts in Wisconsin and what an extreme partisan gerrymander it was would have stood and does stand as the only court decision on that issue. You know, what we have learned from Rucho since then is that we're going to have to find a way to address partisan gerrymandering that is not through a federal court claim directly. And that has us looking at state law. It has us looking all sorts of other places. But we know that this fight is not over in Wisconsin or in any other state because partisan gerrymandering continues to be such an issue for voters.
Thanks, Mel. That was helpful. And again, it reiterated what I have said to people is that no, the courts did not say our maps were fine. Do you know, they, in fact, the trial court, it was, I think the opinion was 159 pages long, filled with bad acts, right? It was just filled with intent to do it. It was effective. And yes, you can't just say the Democrats self-sort into cities. So anyway, that's an update that's an explanation for those of you who have heard that or have thought that the courts have not cared about our maps. It's just not the case. It'll probably be going to a state court the next time we go to court. And I will tell you that everyone on this panel believes that the next set of maps will head to the court. But should that happen, we're going to get into where we've alluded to this before, but the playing field is very different now. So don't say to yourself, oh no, here we go again. It's going to be this all over again. That is not the case. So remember when I talked about the buckets? Well, the government bucket looks very different now than it did before. We have what's called divided government. Our legislature is controlled by one party, and the governor who sits in the governor's mansion is another party. And you've already heard tonight that the legislature is in charge of producing the maps. They don't actually draw them. They have consultants who do that. But the governor has to sign off on them. And he has said that if the maps aren't fair, then he is going to veto them. So the governor has done one other thing. He has also set up a People's Maps Commission. So I want to turn back to Carlene. And Carlene, if you could bring us up to speed on the People's Maps Commission and its activities. How is it founded? What are they doing? And what can we do to help?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So after the 2019 biennial budget, the governor had put money into that budget that would have addressed nonpartisan redistricting. That was taken out by the Joint Finance Committee. And for anybody who isn't aware, our budgets are on a biennial basis, and right now they're being considered. The 2021 to 2023 budget is being considered right now. So after that money was taken out of the budget and any language around nonpartisan redistricting, the governor decided that, okay, fine, I'll just do this a different way. And he, by executive order, created the People's Maps Commission. Now, he did not appoint the people who are on the commission. They had to apply. There was very rigorous criteria around that. They couldn't be elected officials. They couldn't be lobbyists. They couldn't serve in party leadership in any of the registered parties within our state. They had to be voters, etc. They were, those applicants were vetted, and then that went to a 3-judge panel. And those were the people who chose the 9 people who are on the People's Maps Commission. Now, that happened last summer. The whole process started about this time, and they actually were chosen by the end of summer and started their work in October. And between October and March, October of 2020 and March of 2021, They held hearings in every congressional district around the state. They heard from redistricting experts, including, ironically, Keith Gaddy, who was a consultant for the Republicans, who said, "Don't get me wrong, expert opinion and what I feel personally are very different. You have very gerrymandered maps, and they need to be dealt with." And he was the consultant for the red map folks who created the maps that we currently have. So in those 8 congressional district hearings, they heard from redistricting experts, and they heard from lots of regular folks about how these maps have impacted them where they live in their congressional district. They have now entered, so that went until March 11th was their last hearing. And now they are in the community mapping stage. So what that means is that they're working with Moon Duchin, who is a professor from Tufts University, and the MGGG. It's a redistricting software using Districtor, and this gets really like technical. I can't even begin to say that I understand how these things work, but suffice it to say that we, the people of Wisconsin, can draw maps using this software that represent communities, and I think you have my community in one of the slides, of people with whom we have shared interests, areas with whom we have shared interests that should be kept within the same district. And much as Deb was explaining where she decides to grocery shop and those kinds of things, where those areas are and what that means. So that's the stage that we're in now. I should say the People's Maps Commission is in now, and that will go through the middle of summer, gathering these community maps that the folks at Districtor and MGGG will use to create heat maps, which are areas of consensus. So many areas that should remain within a district to help them draft maps that represent us, the people of Wisconsin.
So do you want me to show, do you have some slides? Do you want me to put up the slides?
Sure.
Okay. Oops, that was wrong. Uh-oh, you'll see that I came prepared to speak about things, so I have notes. Let's try this one. Do you want to just whip through these slides in a minute for us?
Do you want to go back one, I think?
For you, Carlene, I will. Nope.
Okay, so this, and one more, one forward.
Oh, one forward.
That
Yep,
one.
there we go. Okay.
Okay,
Yep.
so this is my community. This is the community map that I created. The yellow area is the school district. I live in the Village of Oregon, which is the blue part here. And I don't know, can you see my cursor moving around on there?
No, because I'm the one sharing the screen.
Okay, so the blue part is my village. The yellow part is the school district that I live in, and it encompasses some rural areas that are townships, and it also encompasses the green area, which is another village. Currently, my village is represented by 2 different assembly people. It's a very small village. There's only 13 wards in my village. We have 2 different assembly representatives, and we have 2 different Senate representatives. Our school district has 3 assembly representatives and 3 senators. So, you know, when I drew my map, it was like, okay, so my school district should all be within the same district, because, and I go into a lot of detail in the description of my map about why that should be the case. And this is the kind of thing that people can have input in, into why an area has shared interests and why it should be represented by fewer than 1 representative. So if you want to move, that'd be great. So there are lots of different ways to think about what a community of interest is. I think.
Oh, see, okay, these are out of order. Here
Yeah.
we go. Here.
Okay. So there are ways to think about what a community of interest might be. And having whole municipalities, that third bullet point, whole municipalities when possible, it is certainly possible in the case of my area that the whole municipality, we are far less than any district needs to encompass. And it's another example of cracking things apart. So this is an opportunity for folks to have input into that. So yeah, if you want to click to the district slide, that would be great.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so this is not something that you have to download onto your computer. So you're not going to get any virus from it or anything. You can access it online and play around with it and think about, okay, what would my community of interest look like? Talk to your friends and neighbors. Actually get together with your friends and neighbors and talk about how should we be represented and which parts of the areas around us should also be part of our district. So when somebody like Deb Andraca is elected, you know, she has some sense of why it is you feel like your community should be all together. What is represented by that?
So I'm just I just want to comment that the North Shore Fair, that people are drawing maps all around the state. I was involved in a group in Waukesha last week where I was collecting data. The North Shore Fair Maps team is something we call map play, and we get groups of 4 people together, and then we have a mapper and an interviewer, and we create each person in the game. We think it's so fun. We call it map play. So each person creates sort of their own map. And what I've decided is the real magic of this is if you think about when I go back to civics and we're supposed to participate in government, if you draw one of these maps and you submit it to the People's Maps Commission, then it gets added, as you said, it gets like heat mapped with all the other maps. Hopefully there'll be thousands of them from around the state. And when the People's Maps come out, you're in there, like you're part of the DNA. And I find that pretty darn exciting. So with that, I'm going to stop screen sharing. And we're going to continue on because we have one more piece in the bucket that we want to talk about before we get to the Q&A. And that is, I'm taking it back to Deb Andraca. While we're out there busy mapping our communities of interest, I've submitted my map already. You're working behind the scenes on proposed legislation about fair maps. So if you can give us a bit of a preview, why would you bring legislation to the floor when it seems impossible to pass? And can you tell us why we should care?
Well, you can say that about everything. Why introduce legislation if it's not going to pass? Because you keep trying and you do what's right is the short answer. The long answer is that this is important. And even if we succeed in getting a fairer map this time, because we happen to have divided government, we do not know what we will have in 10 years. And I have a daughter who turned 18 a few weeks before Election Day and got to vote for me. And my younger daughter is going to be 18 in 2 years. And I don't want this problem to come up every 10 years. This should not be a titanic battle of parties. This should be a process that simply realigns our communities of interest and what is best for the state as a whole. So the legislation we will be introducing in the middle of May uses what's called the Iowa model with some Wisconsin specific modifications. So that basically says, keep your, if you shop at these grocery stores, that's probably a community of interest. If you've got a North Shore Fire Department, that's probably the basis for a district. Keep politicians out of it. The legislation calls for the Legislative Reference Bureau, LRB, to either draw the maps and establish what we're calling a redistricting advisory commission to perform specific tasks in the redistricting process. Something like the People's Maps Commission. 10 years from now, maybe it has a different name. It doesn't matter. the process is what is important. Take it out of the politicians' hands. And I say that as a politician. Make sure that people who are on the community level are doing this without people like me just saying, well, this is my house and I want these voters over here. I should not be allowed to pick the people who I think will vote for me the most, because that's not democracy. I should work very, very hard to earn the votes of the people in my district, whatever that district looks like. And, you know, in the Wisconsin Constitution, Section 3, it says the legislature shall apportion and district anew. It does not say draw. Like, I will not have a pen in hand drawing the maps. And I can't tell you how many legislators in office that I've spoken to who say, oh, well, we have to draw the maps. Do I give them a Sharpie? No, they're not going to do it. We need a independent organization. Just like in the legislature, we had the independent service bureaus doing it so that it is done on behalf of the state, not on behalf of a single politician who may or may not live in the district that they want to run on. It also establishes an open and transparent process for 2021, for 2031, and forever. So we're not kicking this process down. The People's Maps Commission is setting up a gold standard. This is what an open process looks like. This is how it could and should be done. The reason we need legislation is to enshrine that into law so that once and for all, we all know how these maps will be drawn down the line.
Thanks for that. I want to add something that when you said it, it made me think of that maybe we haven't focused or said out and out. And that is that in 2009, I think it was, or 2008, when the Democrats had control in Madison, they could have done something like this. But my understanding is the Democrats thought that they would win big in 2010 and they would get to draw their maps. So getting back to what I said at the beginning, it's really a question of power, and we can quibble over who's worse when it comes to this and who abuses power the most. But I think of it as the concept of power not wanting to let go. And so if we can use this opportunity to try to take it out of the hands of the people who are wielding the power, that will be for the benefit of all. And then one last point before we go into the Q&A, and that is that speaking of Democrats do it, the Fair Maps, the North Shore Fair Maps team is having its next monthly meeting is May 10, and we are bringing in the Republican co-chair of the Maryland Citizens Redistricting Commission, because Maryland was gerrymandered by Democrats and their governor, Larry Hogan, is a Republican. And in fact, their lawsuit went up to the Supreme Court and was part of the same package in the Rucho case. The Maryland case was Lemon, I don't know how to pronounce that, but they were sister cases, one against where the Republicans had gerrymandered, once where the Democrats had gerrymandered. So again, it's a political question, but it's a nonpartisan issue. No matter who does it, it shouldn't be done. So
I just wanted to emphasize that, because even though we're talking about the gerrymander here in Wisconsin, which happens to have been done because the Republicans were in power, Democrats do it too if given the opportunity, and which is why we need to take it out of the hands of the political parties. So for the past 5 years or so, there has been this redistricting legislation introduced in the legislature, and it's always been bipartisan. This is the year it counts. I call it the Super Bowl of maps. And I am still struggling to get the Republicans who have been co-sponsors in years past on this exact same bill, or very, very similar, to sign on again. So we need to hold people accountable. If it's good this year, it should be good every single year. So I will shout out in the past, Representative Novak from Dodgeville, Representative Tranel from Cuba City, Representative Oldenburg from Viroqua, Representative Mursaw from Crivets, and Representative Kitchens. They have all co-sponsored this MAPS legislation in the past. They should sign on again, because this is when it counts. And this is what we will be setting up for the next 10 years for my kids and yours.
Thanks for that. Is your second daughter planning on voting for you if she gets to vote next time?
Well,
Is
my
she?
first daughter said that I had to earn her vote, so I'm sure my second daughter will too.
Okay, good for them, good for them. So we've heard several things. I think you've gotten a pretty, hopefully you've gotten a pretty good idea of the lay of the land. I encourage folks to draw a map, pay attention so you know when the legislation comes out. If you live in a district with a Republican legislator, reach out and say you want that person to support this legislation. Check to see whether your legislator supported it before. Deb gave you a list. Just tell everybody that we need to have nonpartisan maps. Another thing you can do is you can connect with Fair Maps Wisconsin. You can join their Facebook group. You can join the social media team. You can amplify messages. You can write letters to the editor. I get a gerrymandering update every day, a Google thing, and there's like hardly a day goes by without a letter to the editor written in Wisconsin. So speak out, draw a map, and to take action. So I know we have some questions. We've got 15 minutes left to handle questions, or about a little under 15, because we're going to do a quick lightning round at the end. And one of the questions that I know we have, and so I'm going to go ahead and ask it right off the bat, and that is something that I imagine is on people's minds, and it is for Mel. So before the maps were even drawn, this set of maps, the legislature hired lawyers to defend them. And last Thursday, it's very timely, it's good we had this meeting tonight, a judge threw out that contract that where they were going to pay to have these maps defended. Law Forward filed an amicus brief in that case. And can you give us an update, Mel, on that, and share your thoughts about where things, if you have any other thoughts to say about where things may head in the courts from here?
Absolutely. So this was kind of the beginning of redistricting litigation in one way in Wisconsin. Some of you may recall that after a Democrat was elected in 2018, there was this lame duck session of the legislature. The legislature gave themselves a bunch of other powers, including hiring outside lawyers, knowing that they would have a Democratic attorney general coming in. And Governor Walker, who was a Republican, signed those laws before leaving office. So the legislature has recently given themselves this expanded power to hire private lawyers with taxpayer funds, by the way. And these folks are billing at the rates you would imagine. They're not exactly our nonprofit rates. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars here, which is why the stakes are so high. However, the legislature did not wait to hire these outside lawyers until there was actual litigation pending. They just hired lawyers assuming there would be litigation, but didn't wait for an action to be filed, which they did not actually give themselves the power to do, which Judge Elke and the Dane County Circuit Court recognized. It's a little embarrassing maybe for the legislature that they didn't quite think of this scenario, but those contracts have been declared void, and those lawyers cannot be paid with taxpayer dollars, at least as long as this decision stands. We did immediately hear, of course, the next day from the legislature that they will be appealing the decision, and we do expect that this will be appealed all the way to the state Supreme Court, because this is a really high stakes issue. The legislature wants to be able to use these outside lawyers so that they can keep this process secretive, and so that they can use computer algorithms and all these things they did last time to protect this gerrymander and enshrine it for another 10 years. They've hired some of the same lawyers that they used to do that work last time. So I don't think we have any questions about their motives. However, we will continue pushing back on this. There's a group of teachers from MTI who were part of bringing this challenge and were successful in the Dane County Circuit Court. As Deb mentioned, Law Forward filed a brief on behalf of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, raising additional arguments about how these are partisan political goals and they should not be paid for with taxpayer dollars, whether there's a litigation pending or not. So we imagine we'll continue to have that fight through the appellate courts and probably all the way to the Supreme Court, but it will likely move pretty quickly. So we'll see what happens. And if you sign up for our newsletters at lawforward.org, we will keep you updated on how the case is proceeding.
Great, thank you, Mel, for that. So Carlene, were you paying attention to the questions, the Q&A?
Oh yeah, there's 17 of them. A couple of them I've answered. I'm waiting to hear back whether or not folks feel like the conversation answered those. But yes, should I start to ask them?
Yeah, go ahead and ask away.
Okay, so yesterday, recent census data were released, and we learned that coastal states, California and New York in particular, saw major loss in population. What does that mean for congressional seats, especially as it affects Dems?
Is that a Mel question or Deb question? Let's start with Mel.
I think that's a Mel question.
I do too. We're gonna send that to Mel. No, it's that way. And she's go ahead, Mel.
I can answer if you like.
No, we're gonna have Mel. We're wasting precious time. Let's start with Mel.
Okay, so just so we're all on the same page, what happened is the first round of census data was released. So this is just the level of data that tells us how many seats in Congress each state will get. It does not allow us to start drawing our state legislative districts or anything like that. It's not that detailed level, but it tells us how many people live in the entire state of Wisconsin and the entire state of California and all the other states. So what it means for Wisconsin is that we are keeping our 8 congressional seats. It does not mean any sort of changes there. However, Wisconsin's congressional maps have usually been the least controversial of any of them. So that's interesting. But to the actual question, I think it's really hard to tell at this point what it will mean for the makeup of Congress after another round of elections, because one of the things that's going to be at play here is what happens in this round of redistricting. So we now have some states that are drawing their congressional districts with nonpartisan commissions or nonpartisan bodies for the first time, and I think that will impact how those seats get drawn. We also know that there will be lots of court challenges. In Wisconsin, we may or may not see congressional districts challenged depending on how they're drawn, but we know they'll be challenged in lots of other states. So I think while the population shifts are certainly interesting and worth noting, it does not tell us right now what the outcome is going to be. We're going to have a lot of lawsuits to go before we know the answer of what it'll mean for Democrats and Republicans in Congress as a whole.
So we don't need to worry quite yet. We just need to take action and focus on Wisconsin. Okay, Carlene.
Yeah.
What's next?
And I would just add, I'm from North Carolina, and North Carolina is one of the states that added population and has very gerrymandered maps, and their legislature behaves very much like our legislature does. Yeah, I feel like there's this kind of symbiosis, if you will, between North Carolina and Wisconsin, which is sad. But that said, these increases in population actually have the potential to impact how those states vote, because there are very new folks, much like Georgia, moving into places that have been traditionally one way or another. So I just wanted to add that onto what Mel had said. Okay, so next question from David. By the way, the first question was from Anonymous. So this is from David. If districts are to be equal in population size, how do we count individuals in prison? They may live in places like Plymouth, but cannot vote. And I think Adams County, 80% of the population in Adams County is in prison. And
So who wants to tackle prison gerrymandering? Is that a Mel question again? Otherwise, I can do a little bit on it. But Mel, do you want to field this one too?
Sure. I just want to flag that this is a huge issue in Wisconsin and lots of other states, and prison gerrymandering is the right term. This is also a thing that has a huge impact in who gets represented in our state government. So Wisconsin and many other states currently count incarcerated people where they are incarcerated for the purpose of the census and for the purpose of redistricting. They do not count them in the communities where they came from and where they will likely return to when they are out of state custody. What that means is we're giving way more power to the votes of people who live in these rural communities where prisons are most likely located in states like Wisconsin, because so many of the people who are being counted there for one person, one vote purposes do not get to vote. And if you think about the kind of communities that we have people in Wisconsin being incarcerated from is disproportionately urban areas like the city of Milwaukee because of racial politics. And then those folks are being incarcerated in very rural areas. Most of the people voting in those communities work at the prison or institutions that serve the prison. So their votes have a tremendous amount of power in electing state representatives because there are actually very few folks who can vote there, even though the district is equally populated with the rest of the state. So this is something that we'll hopefully be able to fix in the state of Wisconsin. And I know that the representative and her colleagues have introduced bills like this before, and will hopefully be prioritizing this, in the coming session, because it's a very serious issue in Wisconsin and lots of other states.
And it's a real racial and civil rights issue. And I do, the outline does have some material on prison gerrymandering. So Carlene, we can do maybe one more question and then we're going to go into our lightning.
Oh my
round.
gosh, we have 22 questions.
Yeah,
So
well,
I
when
thi-
you
I
have
think
like,
we should
200
definitely
people
save-
sign up. So what, so
We should definitely save these questions and see if we can have some folks like write answers to them and send them out.
okay.
Can we do that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Is that okay? Do you have
so-
one more you want to pick out of the hat?
Um,
Or should we just go to the lightning round?
So I'm going to ask this one. This is from Rose. Will the pressure of the statewide referendums plus a fair maps commission that shows that the people of the state clearly want to influence the, clearly want a nonpartisan process, influence the courts? And why is the legislature allowed to hire expensive lawyers?
Well, I hate to say this, Mel, but it's another court question. So it's, will they influence, well, I will say, first of all, that the reason they were allowed to hire lawyers is because of the lame duck, I'll answer that part, the lame duck session where when they had full control of government, they gave themselves that right, but through either not thinking about it or just poor draftsmanship, they didn't put it so that, oh, we don't even have to have a lawsuit before we hire outside lawyers and spend a lot of money. So that's how that came about. But Mel, do you have thoughts on the court of opinion affecting the courts? You could share your thoughts, and then as someone who used to practice law, I'll give you my thoughts.
Sure. So the state level referendums, or I'm sorry, the local referendums in Wisconsin are not binding, meaning the legislature's hands aren't tied by those. However, they do influence the opinion of both the legislators and the court of public opinion, for lack of a better word. Justices aren't going to decide something based on like, look, we've got 19 statewide or 19 local referendums or anything like that, but they are real people who live in the real world. And of course, public opinion, public discourse influences what they think is possible and what they think is logical in the world.
That's a good answer. And I feel that way, that the courts sometimes follow the court of public opinion. So I probably shouldn't have done that because we need time for your lightning round. So what I want is and then we've got our closing slides, of course. So I want the panelists to have one more shot at sharing their wisdom, and in under a minute, and I did tell you this is coming, I told you 2 minutes, but you only get one. Tell us one thing you really want the participants to do and one thing that gives you hope. So I was going to start with Mel, but we really picked on her a lot now. So I'm going to start with Carlene because she's not on mute. So one thing you want people to do, one thing that gives you hope.
Well, I live in a state of hope. So let's just start there. I mean, I'm the eternal optimist, and I always think that we the people and can affect change. And that's part of the reason I get up every day and do the things that I do. So I would very much like for people to engage in this, stay up to date, and to get together with friends and neighbors and create a community of interest maps and submit it to the People's Maps Commission, because I do think that is a way to have your voice heard. And when the legislation is introduced by Representative Andraca and someone else in the Senate, to make your voice heard to your legislator, no matter whether they're Democrat or Republican, that you want it passed. We know that Dems could have done this before and they didn't. And so now Republicans need to be the ones who have a hearing and and help us get a fair process in our state.
Good.
This is
We're gonna
about us.
go to Deb next.
Similar to that, I would like people to reach out, especially if you are represented by a Republican. And this is not about electing more Democrats, excuse me, like
Whoa.
crazy weather with my drapes here. It's not about electing more Democrats with a capital D. It's about more democracy with a small d. And no legislator who represents their constituents and does their job should be afraid of this, because it's about transparency. It's about openness. It's about a process that is fair, not done in secret. We shouldn't have to destroy our hard drives after this process is done. All right. So all of these moderate Republicans, they're out there. They do exist, but there's this fear because, and I see it Republicans and Democrats, it's hard when you're in this kind of a situation to break away from the majority or from your caucus. Break away in the name of fairness. Do it, because this is what we want going forward, and this is what we want for the future of the state. And the one thing that gives me hope, I think I'll just shout out the other members of the freshman caucus, because we're seeing more women, we're seeing more diverse candidates, we're seeing just a lot more candidates who represent the state in the legislature. And for the first time, thanks to the election of myself and Sarah Rodriguez, and before that, Robin Vining, the Democrats in the assembly, it's majority women. And that is a fact that gets lost a lot, but it does give me a lot of hope that we're just seeing new and different voices. And there are also 2 Republican women too. So that I am optimistic about that. I like thinking about that and just what that means for our state going forward. And it's not about party. It's really about the messages, what is important, and what our state looks like, and are we fairly represented?
All right, thanks. So Mel, we're almost out of time, and I do have those closing slides. So what are your thoughts?
Number one thing you can do is stay in touch, sign up for Law Forward's newsletter. This stuff is going to move really fast once it's in the courts, and you'll want to be the first to know the breaking news and how you can help. The thing that gives me hope is we are so much better prepared this time than we were in 2010. So many more people know what redistricting is, what partisan gerrymandering is. The court of public opinion is really different. The legal strategy and preparation is very different, and I'm really excited to be a part of that. It's going to be a different game this time.
Good. Well, I'm going to put up the last slide, so I want you all to wave goodbye, because your pictures aren't going to be showing again. And we're going to close out the evening with a couple of last thoughts. And they are that, again, the bucket, the We the People bucket, I just want to remind everyone, if you don't know that We the People are speaking out, we're taking action, and it started a while ago. The Marquette Law School poll showed in 2019 that 72% of voters want a nonpartisan, I left a word out, group to draw Wisconsin maps. Somebody mentioned this, the county work. As of April of 2021, 56 counties backed fair maps. The wows have been hard. They can't get it on they can't get the referendum out there because they can't pierce through the county boards. But the counties that have put referendums out, they've all passed. People want to see fair maps. And then lastly, I just want to share something for the People's Maps Commission collected comments, and they got, by April, the middle of April, they had 755 comments. And on a lark, I like word clouds. And so on a lark, I took the question like, what do you think our new map should be like? And this is what the word cloud said. Check that out. People want the new maps to be nonpartisan. That really pops out. So that gives me hope. And the last couple of slides, I'm going to say again, a pitch to May 10. We have Walter Olson coming from Maryland to talk about their gerrymander, their People's Commission. Again, within 24 hours, you're going to get a survey coming from Grassroots North Shore. You don't need to read this. It's going to be titled Mopping Up Wisconsin's Map Mess. Please fill it out. Please take action. Tell us what you want to do. And then thank yous all around. Thank you to Grassroots North Shore for being our town hall sponsor, the Fair Maps Coalition, the League of Women Voters, Deb, Mel, Carlene, together we can end gerrymandering. So with that, I say good night.